This isn't folklore. It's not a campfire legend passed down with embellishments. What you're about to hear is buried in decades of missing church ledgers, vanished reports, and farmsteads burned to the ground before anyone could ask questions. It's the story of a forgotten line of children. Some said twins, others swore they were copies, raised by a woman who disappeared from public life after a scandal in 1921. Locals gave them a name that still makes people uneasy to say out loud: the Mirror Children. Now, imagine this. You find an old photograph, one that shouldn't exist. 2 barefoot boys standing outside a cabin that's no longer on any map. You look closer and your stomach turns. The boys are the same, but not quite. Like someone tried to duplicate a child and the process went wrong. One detail mismatched. One expression just off. If it were you, would you keep that photograph or burn it before anyone else could see? Welcome, friends, to Sleepy History Tales. Do me a favor right now, check the clock and type the time you're watching in the comments. Tell me where in the world you are, because whether you're half a planet away from Kentucky or just a few counties over, this story has a way of circling back to you. These children were never enrolled in school, never baptized, no birth records, no graves. But witnesses kept seeing them, always, 2 at a time, moving in perfect synchrony. And in 2019, one of them, or both, was caught on a government drone feed. Tonight, I'll tell you what the state tried to bury and what the land itself refused to keep quiet. This is a story about genetics, about isolation, and about a woman who may have engineered her own bloodline. If you're new here, subscribe before we begin. If you've been with us before, you know the rules. Keep the lights low. Listen closely. And if something moves in the corner of your screen, don't look away. We begin, as all good mysteries do, with a photograph no one remembers taking. It was early spring 1939. Record floods had torn through southeastern Kentucky, and the lower rooms of the Leslie County Courthouse were submerged in river water. A small team of archivists went in to salvage what they could. Most of it was what you'd expect. Tax records warped into lumps of mold, birth registries blurred into unreadable ink, and ledgers so waterlogged they'd collapse at a touch. But at the bottom of an unmarked drawer in a warped metal cabinet was something else, a photograph. Faded edges curling, wedged between 2 blank folio sheets as if hidden, not stored. It showed 2 barefoot boys standing in front of a collapsing cabin, shirts hanging off their shoulders like hand-me-downs from another century. One boy's mouth slightly open, the other's eyes unfocused, as if staring past the world entirely. Their faces nearly identical, but not perfectly. One eye a little lower, a jawline just misaligned enough to itch at your mind, like a mirrored reflection that never quite settled into place. No studio mark, no date, no writing on the back, no negatives ever found. Archivists who've seen it swear it feels intentional, as if someone meant it to be discovered much later, or never at all. The official cleanup log filed it under a generic label: Unknown Children Possible Homestead Case. The archivist who catalogued it, Martha Sullivan, later claimed she had no memory of doing so. In a 1973 interview, she said, "It felt like I was interrupting something. I boxed it and moved on." But it didn't stay boxed. Because in 1951, The photograph turned up again in the unsorted drawer of a local historical society. Then again in 1986 in a report on unmarked Appalachian homesteads. By that time, the name Mirror Children had begun circulating, most likely from retired mail carrier Edward Tullis, who said in a 1969 interview, "They weren't twins. Not really. They matched like someone tried to make a copy, but the ink ran out halfway. You'd see them if you rode the mail up Hollow Ridge, just standing there in the tree line, watching." And when the photograph was shown to elderly locals in the 1990s, some recognized the background. Not the boys, the cabin, the warped porch beam, the sloping roof, the missing third step, that cabin, the one in the photograph. Locals said it belonged to a woman named Lila Mae Merriweather, known in the community simply as Miss Lila. She lived on the far edge of Hollow Ridge outside Hyann, Kentucky alone, if you could call it that. She hadn't been seen in town since the early 1920s. No census ever listed children in her household. No county school records matched the faces in that photo, and no obituary, baptismal record, or hospital ledger ever named Lila as a mother. Yet, the rumors, they clung to her like mist on the ridge. A lost WPA field notebook from 1940. Now, nothing but a few typed excerpts contains the only surviving line from an investigator's notes. Cabin inhabited by 2 pale boys. Kinship unknown. That's it. Just one sentence scribbled in pencil. But it was enough to fan the whisper. No one knows who took the photograph. No one remembers handing it to the courthouse. No one can explain why it ended up buried beneath a stack of pre-war property deeds. But every archivist who's examined it agrees something about it is wrong. The way the boys stand as if placed there. The way neither seems aware of the camera or of each other. Faces alike but slightly misaligned. Posture not quite human in its symmetry. That image still exists today. Box 14, File 6, Leslie County Archives. Stamped, catalogued, but never explained. Dated only by water damage and suspicion. It's the first trace of a story that began as fact, then slid sideways into folklore, the earliest known appearance of the phrase mirror children. And maybe, just maybe, someone wanted it to be found, someone like Lila herself, but not yet. In the still fog-heavy interior of Leslie County lies a ridge locals still call Hollow Ridge, even though no official map bears the name anymore. The land there is tangled damp-heavy with laurel thickets and low-rolling fog. Hunters say their dogs refuse to track scent into it. The trees are too still, they say, and in the center of that stillness once stood a cabin. Slumping now into the soil, but in 1938 still holding its shape, still serving as a home. Lila Mae Merriweather had lived there most of her life. Born in 1889, the third of 6 Merriweather children she belonged to, a family long settled in Hyann's outskirts, their names turning up in land ledgers and census rolls only at the edges. The last clear public record of her is a 1906 property transaction, when she inherited the cabin after her mother's death. She was 17. The cabin was modest one room fed by a spring that dried every 3rd summer. No plumbing, no recorded upgrades. Yet every year the taxes were paid in exact change in person until 1921. Then everything stopped. Lila withdrew from town life entirely, and the vacuum she left filled quickly with whispers. The only concrete clue to what happened comes from a 1923 church ledger at the First Baptist Church of Hyen, stricken from the rolls on grounds of moral unfitness. No footnote, no explanation. But in 1978, a former church secretary recalled overhearing the elders' meeting when the decision was made. The pastor spoke of unholy confusion in Lila's household and of her youngest brother Samuel, who had vanished shortly after a long illness. No missing persons report was ever filed. From that year on, Lila vanished from public records entirely. No marriage, no death notice, no property sale. And then in 1938, sightings began. 2 boys, pale, thin, seen gathering kindling at the tree line near Hollow Ridge. Always together, always silent. They weren't enrolled in school. They didn't appear in the 1940 census. The county's only midwife swore she had never delivered twins matching their description. But the sightings kept coming from hunters, from the occasional postal route, from a single rural mail carrier who described them in a way I've never forgotten. It was like seeing the same face on 2 clocks. One ran fast, one ran slow, but they ticked the same. The boys never wandered far, never more than 100 yards from the cabin. And Lila, older now, her hair silver and unbound, was said to appear on the porch once every 2 weeks when the mail wagon rattled up the ridge. She never waved, never called out, just stood there, watching, until the driver set the parcel down and drove away. Those few who dared to climb past the warped cedar fence said the air shifted there like the land itself was watching. Even at high noon, sunlight seemed to dim. One farmer told a folklorist in 1964 that his horse refused to take another step within 30 feet of the gate. It was like the ground was holding its breath, he said. No birth certificates, no baptismal records, no adoption files. Yet, from 1938 until at least 1954, Lila lived with them. 2 boys with no origin anyone could trace. They grew older, yes, but never seemed to grow outward. No friends, no visitors, and certainly no questions. Were they hers? Were they blood? Or were they something else entirely? Whatever they were hers. And in that cabin for 16 years, whatever happened unseen by any authority. Lila May. Meriwether hadn't simply stepped away from public life. She had scrubbed herself from it, and in the empty space she left, something else had taken root. By 1949, the Appalachian back roads weren't really roads at all, just pale threads of gravel folding into forest sunlight, swallowed whole by the canopy. For a traveling merchant like Howard Kittner, who hauled crates of nails lanterns and kerosene stoves across 3 counties, the way in was half forgotten, and the way out never certain. On June 17th of that year, Kittner's route took him along the upper ridge west of Hien, near a hollow almost never marked on maps. Locals called it Dead Mare. Cut a place even moonshiners avoided. Kittner hadn't planned to stop. He meant only to pass through on his way to a homestead in need of stovepipe. But the road narrowed sharply, and his mule team stalled near an old cedar post fence. That's when he saw them. 2 boys stood on the porch of a collapsing cabin, framed by leaning beams and weather-grey wood. Barefoot, wearing shirts several sizes too large, arms hanging at their sides, motionless. They didn't look at me exactly, Kittner later wrote. One stared somewhere past me. The other, I'm not sure he was seeing at all. Their faces were alike, but wrong, like trying to press two halves of a coin together after the mold had warped. Their eyes were cloudy. Not blind, not milky white, just wrong. Like river water with fog beneath the surface. The cabin was silent. No creak of floorboards. No hint of movement behind them. Kittner tipped his hat, mumbled a polite howdy, and clicked the reins. Neither child blinked. That evening unsettled in a way he couldn't shake. Kittner did something rare for a man. In his line of work, he wrote it down. At the boarding house where he slept in Hyen, he sat at a small desk and penned a letter to the Kentucky State Welfare Office in Frankfurt. Dated June 18th, 1949, it read in part. On the porch stood two young boys. They appeared undernourished but not starving, barefoot, unspeaking. They did not react when I spoke. I saw no sign of a guardian. I am not writing of injury or neglect in the physical sense, but no child should look that empty. They were not dirty, not bruised, just hollow. That's worse. I believe they are in need of help of some kind. The letter was logged on June 22, 1949 under the vague heading, Rural Report, High-End Vicinity, Unknown Minors. No case number was assigned. That year, Kentucky's welfare office received more than $4,000 such letters from rural counties, most handwritten, many without return addresses. According to a former intake clerk interviewed decades later, anything from High-End went straight to the bottom of the pile. Too far gone. Too few roads, she said. Kittner's letter ended up in a box labeled Non-Urgent Remote Claims. The box was never reviewed. Historian Dr. Melissa Burr, author of Hollows Without Maps, would later call that moment the state's lost chance. A man with no reason to lie saw something that disturbed him enough to write it down, she said. They shelved it. No follow-up. No visit to Deadmere Cut. That was the moment someone could have walked up that porch and didn't. The boys were never named. The cabin was never entered. And the letter Howard Kittner's desperate warning faded into the dark, like the children it described, not lost, just unread. Whatever Kittner saw on that porch didn't vanish. It grew quietly unseen until someone else came looking. The Merriweather cabin no longer stands. But scraps of its order, its strange rules have been pieced together from field notes, forensic lists, and a handful of recovered objects. And what emerges is not a home. It's a ritual space, one held together by silence, symmetry, and fear. By the early 1940s, the cabin was already sinking into itself. The porch sagged. Shingles rotted through. And the windows, though unbroken, were sealed from the inside with heavy burlap. Not for weather, for reflection. A man interviewed in the 1970s recalled, it was so thick you couldn't tell if it was day or night inside. Inside, there were rules, no mirrors, not even polished metal. Anything that might give back a reflection glass, oil pans, water basins, was covered, hidden, or gone entirely. Even the stove door was painted matte black. A warped vanity, likely inherited, had its mirror turned to face the wall nailed there with rusted iron, and what one investigator swore was dried animal sinew. Meals were silent. 3 tin plates, no utensils. Food passed from one to another. In the center of the table, a blackened scorch ring as if something had once sat there. A lantern, an iron crucible. No one could say. From the recovered notes of social worker Evelyn Cross. The boys wait for her to chew before they begin. They copy her hands, every bite matched like clock hands clicking in unison. They were not called by names. Miss Lila called them only my echoes. That word echoes appeared again and again in her belongings. Cloth scraps with looping cursive. Hymns rewritten in plural. We rise, we fall, we echo. Local linguists later identified traces of Appalachian-inflected Gaelic in these fragments, a dialect dead almost everywhere else by the late 1800s, preserved only in deep mountain pockets. Above the place where the boys slept, carved into a beam, Shana Anam, same soul. One of the only first-hand accounts, possibly from one of the boys themselves, was found gouged beneath a rusted bed frame. The letters were crude, double back on themselves, carved by nail or blade. My brother cries with no sound. We share the same night. I was born too late. We eat from her hand. We speak when the wind stops. The phrase we share. The same night appeared 3 times, always far apart. A forensic specialist studying the marks decades later noted, it's as if it was written with one hand, but 2 minds. The walls once held portraits, but the faces were turned away. Family photographs scratched through at the eyes. Others folded neatly down the center. Some smeared with a waxy black mix of soot and lard. Not burned, not destroyed, just obscured. Even the tools had been changed. A hammerhead repurposed into a chime. A pitchfork bent into an arch above the doorframe like a crude sigil. Religious items altered a rosary with doubled crosses. A Bible with passages cut out and replaced with handwritten lines in a strange blend of Gaelic and English. On the last page of Psalms, they are one born in rhythm. Let no mirror speak. And then in the spring of 1953, someone did come looking. Her name was Evelyn Cross, 24 years old, a social worker from Louisville. She'd been assigned to a new state-funded outreach program designed to find and help families living in the deepest, most isolated hollers of Appalachia. Post-war money had been set aside to bring schooling food stamps and welfare to places the post no longer reached. Evelyn was fresh out of Berea College honors in sociology and Appalachian studies. Bright, ambitious, idealistic to a fault, some said. In a memo dated March 9th, her supervisor wrote, "Miss Cross is determined to reach those no one else will." That can be useful or dangerous. That's what her supervisor had said. Her assignment sent her to Hyen, Kentucky, a town already half abandoned by 1953. Mine closures, roads washed away, houses boarded up and swallowed by kudzu. Her driver, a local, paid for navigation, stopped at the timberline near Hollow Ridge and refused to go further. The roads don't like strangers, so she walked alone. Nearly 5 miles up a ravine-carved path, carrying only her satchel, a packed lunch, and the state-issued welfare assessment form. At the ridge, she found it, though she didn't yet know its name. The Meriwether Cabin. Her journal, meticulous in its early pages, was recovered decades later, wrapped in a child's cotton shirt. The fabric stained, the leather binding warped. and when opened, it smelled faintly of iron and earth. The first entry reads, April 3rd, 1953, 7:40 p.m. Reached the homestead. Cabin in poor repair. No doorbell. Knocked twice, no answer. About to leave when 2 children stepped onto the porch. Identical in height, posture clothes. Barefoot. They didn't speak, just watched. Like standing between 2 reflections. Her next entry came just hours later. April 3rd, 1953. 6:10 p.m. Offered canned peaches. Refused. Woman appeared, older white hair in a braid skin, darkened by sun. She said only, "You're late?" Her voice was flat. She called them my echoes. No names. She allowed me to stay the night. Claims she needs no help. Will assess further tomorrow. After that, her handwriting changes. Fluid lines splinter into jagged strokes. April 4th. Time unclear. There's something wrong with their mouths. They move like they're learning to be human. One copies the other before speaking. I asked about their mother. They both pointed at the same tree. No words, just pointed. Her final entry trembles across the page. April 4th. Late. Their lungs don't breathe right, not wheezing, timing. Like one waits for the other. They hold hands in their sleep. I am the only one who blinks. Evelyn Cross never returned to Louisville. Her disappearance was filed as a presumed wilderness accident. The official statement blamed bad roads and lack of communication lines. Privately, some field officers said otherwise. Her driver refused all future jobs in Leslie County. A box of her field documents vanished, taken by a man claiming to be from the state archives, though no such name existed in any record. The journal itself didn't resurface until 1979 at an estate sale in Harlem, bought by a collector of southern ephemera who noted the strange smell and how the ink had bled as if the paper had sweated. On the last page in handwriting, not believed to be hers, were 3 words. We breathe together. The case was never reopened. Her name was never added to the missing persons registry. But in Hyen they remember, not the name, the story. A woman who walked into the hollow and never walked back out. On the morning of April 12th, 1954, a haze rose above the trees at the edge of Hollow Ridge. It might have gone unnoticed except for one man, Caleb Langford, a tobacco farmer whose land bordered the Meriwether Tract. 30 years later, he recalled, "It wasn't a fire I knew. Not black smoke, not thick, just pale grey like steam of a kettle, and the smell, wet copper and mold. Nothing burning should smell like that." Langford rode his mule partway up the trail but stopped short of the boundary. Not out of fear, he said. Just instinct. From the ridge, he saw it, or rather didn't. The Meriwether cabin was gone. Not collapsed, not rotted, gone. The Leslie County Sheriff's Office received a call 2 days later. By midweek, a field team followed an old mining map and Langford's directions. What they found baffled even seasoned investigators. The cabin site was wrong. Not burned from the outside in like every other Appalachian fire investigators had seen. It had collapsed inward, a tight circular scorch at its center, as if the blaze had bloomed from the house's own heart. No tree line burns, no brush fire, no signs of accelerant. The perimeter was untouched, almost respectful. Among the ashes, a few things had survived. A child's leather shoe blackened its laces, melted into the tongue. A fragment of human jawbone, no match to any state dental records. And most haunting of all, 2 sets of tiny barefoot prints pressed into soot like clay, walking side by side into the woods, away from the ruin, never returning. No adult remains, no trace of Lil Merriweather. 3 days later, an envelope arrived at the Leslie County office. No return address. Inside a single yellowed page, folded twice, typed neatly, the ink blotched in, the way an overworked Remington Model 5 leaves its fingerprints. The blood went in circles. The twins were never meant to see the sun. No fingerprints, no postal trail. The envelope vanished from evidence before it could be tested. The letter was logged, copied, and quietly filed away. In the official record, the Merriweather fire never happened. The 1955 audit of regional structure fires lists only 2 in Leslie County that year, neither at Hollow Ridge. No insurance claim, no death certificates. The land was marked abandoned and reverted to the county. No one bought it. The trail disappeared under years of moss and vine. It wasn't negligence, it was avoidance. Retired Deputy Willard Mooney said it best in a 1983 interview. That house wasn't a house anymore. It was a wound. The letter remained buried in a courthouse drawer until archivists found it during renovations in 1991. It's now locked in the county's historical annex under a restricted label. Merriweather unresolved. No second letter. No confession. But the phrase "the blood went in circles" became a quiet warning in Hine. A proverb spoken in half whispers and never explained to outsiders. The cabin is gone. The path is overgrown, but not erased. Something ended that April, but not everything. After 1954, any official trace of the twins, if such records ever existed, stopped cold. No death certificates, no sightings on paper. The case burned itself into silence. But the people of Appalachia don't need paperwork to remember. They keep stories alive. The first post-fire sighting came in 1956, just 2 years after the cabin vanished. A hunter named Edgar Mullins, a lifelong resident of nearby Dry Hollow, claimed he was tracking deer by lantern light along a creek bed. He saw them upstream, 2 barefoot boys standing ankle-deep in water. At first, I thought they was just lost, Mullins told a folklorist years later. But then I noticed neither one moved. Not when I stepped in the water. Not when I raised the lantern. They were just staring at the current, same posture, same head tilt. The one on the left had a twitch in his eye like he was trying to remember how blinking worked. Edgar Mullins backed away, lantern trembling in his hand. When he returned with others, the creek was empty. The next major account came in 1962 from Margaret Hensley, a retired schoolteacher from Pikeville. She claimed she'd picked up 2 teenage boys on the roadside near Dismal Creek. Pale, not sickly, just paper-colored. Their collared shirts tucked into pressed slacks hands, folded in their laps like they'd been taught manners by someone who had never met a real child. They never blinked, she later wrote. I offered them peanuts. They didn't eat. One turned to me and whispered, "We're going back." Then they opened the door on a bend in the road and stepped out. I didn't even stop the car. She filed no report. She told the story only once in 1974 for a traveling radio program called Backwoods Shadows. The recording aired once, then vanished into a private folklore collection in Charleston. By the late 1960s, the Mirror Boys had become part of the Appalachian night vocabulary. Stories moved in layers. Camp counselors warned kids not to stray from firelight. Grandparents muttered about boys who came to windows staring through glass but never knocking. In Hyen, some woke to find screen doors left ajar and two muddy barefoot prints outside bedroom windows. In 1968, the Leslie Ledger ran a one-paragraph oddity. Mrs. Leanne Carter of Mill Creek reports seeing two matching boys watching her cows from the ridge. Says they vanished when called. Husband claims she was spooked by shadows. There was no follow-up. Academic interest peaked in the early 70s when Berea College folklorist Dr. Helen Worthing published Echoes in the Blood Appalachian Twin Law and Anomalous Sighting Reports. She catalogued 22 distinct accounts, everyone involving two silent identical boys near water glass or a doorway. These stories, she wrote, are not built from fantasy. They are built from memory. Whether supernatural or not, they carry weight. Familial, regional, inherited. They belong to a place that does not forget. The stories didn't stop. A 1973 camper swore he woke to find two boys sitting cross-legged outside his tent, hands on their knees, faces slack with either sleep or imitation. Some dismissed it all as mass suggestion. Those who'd heard the stories longest said otherwise. These weren't tales. They were inheritances. A way of remembering what no one was allowed to say, that something had survived the fire and it was still watching. In 1971, Dr. Marshall Greaves, a retired clinical psychiatrist from Columbus, rented a small cabin outside Hyen. Locals assumed he'd come for quiet. They were wrong. Greaves had been privately investigating the 1953 disappearance of Evelyn Cross, a former student of his at Berea College. Her case had been shelved decades earlier, but it had haunted him. He came to Kentucky for answers. Months in the archives of Leslie and Perry, counties yielded something worse than silence. Entire branches of the Merriweather family, particularly between 1890 and 1920, simply dissolved after 1912. Births were recorded. Deaths were not. Marriages broke mid-lineage. In a 1908 county registry, he found 6 Merriweather children living at a now-defunct homestead. By 1915, every name had been crossed out. No burial notes, no migration records. The deeper he dug, the stranger the pattern became. Inheritance documents, land transfers, even literacy logs began to blur. Names repeating relationships collapsing inward. Uncles marked as fathers. Cousins listed as siblings. The family tree wasn't branching. It was tightening. In the margin of his notebook, Greaves scrawled a single line, not a family tree, but a spiral. The blood turned inward. By 1974, Dr. Marshall Greaves had over 200 pages of notes, genealogical charts, taped interviews, whispered memories from locals who were running out of years. One woman, now blind, told him they didn't marry out. Never did. Kept to themselves like a promise. Greaves became convinced that Lila Mae Merriweather, long rumored to have raised twins in isolation, hadn't simply inherited a damaged bloodline, she had designed it. In his final typed note, he wrote, "This wasn't caregiving, this was architecture. She built them. The twins Evelyn Cross met were not accidents of isolation. They were the deliberate outcome of generations of inbreeding, not for science, but for ritual. Graves had enough to name names, enough to force the state to reopen the cross case. Then, February 1979, a neighbor delivering firewood found Greaves' cabin door wide open. Nothing stolen. On the kitchen table, his manuscript neatly stacked, arranged by chapter. Tape recorder with fresh batteries, reading glasses atop his journal, and in the exact center, a black and white photograph no one had seen before. 2 barefoot boys knee-deep in a creek, arms locked at the elbows, heads tilted identically toward the lens, eyes reflecting no light, no clue who took it, no date. Graves himself was gone. Search teams swept the hills. Dogs refused to cross a creek near the old Meriwether plot. No prints, no signs. His disappearance was ruled inconclusive. Dr. Leslie Warren, a colleague from the Columbus State Psychiatric Hospital, later said, Marshall didn't believe in ghosts. He believed in patterns. If he vanished, it's because someone decided the pattern was full. Graves' notes were boxed for archive, but entire pages are missing. The photograph survives, sealed under glass. Its evidence label is now faded to nothing. Researchers agree on one thing: Graves didn't wander too far. He got too close. Fall 1992. A state-funded road expansion north of Hyann, Kentucky, was cutting through one of the last untouched ridgelines. Work was steady until the morning of October 4th. Beneath the eastern tree line, a backhoe hit something soft. At first, they thought it was an animal. It wasn't. A shallow pit 6 feet across. 3 partial skeletons, child-sized, curled deliberately as if placed. Work stopped. The Kentucky State Anthropological Unit arrived within 36 hours. 3 weeks later, lead anthropologist Dr. Eileen Cast gave no public statement, but notes from a 1994 forensic conference later surfaced. The bones were human, children aged 7 to 10. Their skulls malformed, not from injury, but development. Cranial plates fused too early. Jaws aligned in unnatural ways. Teeth overlapping in mirrored symmetry. Too symmetrical to be chance. Too wrong to be twins. No jewelry, no clothing, no cloth at all. DNA tech in 1992 was limited, but mitochondrial tests ruled out any match to known missing children since 1960. Dental records, no match. No coffins, no grave markers. Just bare bone and dirt. And on the smallest jawbone, a detail that silenced the room. A faint carving. So shallow it was almost invisible. A sideways loop. An infinity sign. Post-mortem. Cut with a fine metal tool. Within 6 weeks, the Kentucky Historical Preservation Office issued its verdict. Indeterminate historic remains likely pre-1950s. No current criminal relevance. The dig resumed. A field technician speaking anonymously to a documentary team in 2001 remembered it this way. I'd seen everything. Burned bodies, Civil War graves, even fetal remains in Pike County. But this wasn't right. Those kids weren't just deformed. They were copied. Like someone tried to make the same person twice and got it wrong 3 times. When I saw that jawbone, saw that symbol, I packed my gear. Never worked another dig. The bones were quietly sealed in unmarked boxes labeled only with case ID HY90H3 and sent to state storage in Frankfurt. As of 2025, they've never been re-examined. No memorial, no burial records. The pit was backfilled, compacted, and now lies beneath the paved shoulder of Route 13A. Workers call that stretch the quiet cut. No birds sing there. None ever nest. But in the folklore circles of eastern Kentucky, the discovery lit an old fire. Stories resurfaced. Tales of the mirror boys, pale children in pairs, standing in creek beds, or just inside the tree line, staring without expression. The infinity loop symbol, first noted in a Meriwether hymn transcription in 1917, became a subject of fierce debate. Was it a family crest, a curse, or the generational brand of a bloodline, preserved with precision? Folklorist Dr. Helen Worthing put it plainly in a 1997 Appalachian Record article. We cannot explain what the state has chosen not to question. In high N, the ground talks when people won't. These children weren't found, they were revealed. No one claimed them. No one knew their origin. And yet, the bones muted, boxed, forgotten, became a silent testimony. Not to what happened, but to how far the earth will go to hide what others refuse to see. By the 2000s, Meriwether was a name most had forgotten. The cabin was long gone. The bones locked in state archives. The stories softened into whispers. Twins in the woods. Children without names. But in Appalachia, stories don't die. They wait. August 2007. Two hikers from Hazard County cut through Hollow Ridge while mapping water levels. Jeremy Fields, a volunteer scout leader, told the High-End Ledger, "We came around a bend and saw something sticking up from the mud. Thought it was an old trail marker, but it was a wooden cross rough pine lashed with rusted fence wire. Tied to it were two children's shoes side by side. Clean. Like the day they were bought. 1950s era canvas soles. Immaculately preserved. Burned into the cross with a heated nail were the words, same blood, same soul, same end. No trail nearby. No campsite. No grave. No one came forward." 2013. Retired bail bondsman turned investigator Royce Kellerman began tracing a series of anonymous letters mailed to 5 rural towns near High-End. Small typed, signed only M. Meriwether. No return address. Each hinted at unfinished guardianship, misaligned offspring, and the quiet science of resemblance. Kellerman mapped the postmarks all within a 42-mile loop. Always rural drop boxes. Always near ridge access roads. His conclusion: this wasn't hiding. This was orbiting. The report went to the sheriff's office. No follow-up. 2019. The US Forest Service ran drone surveys over remote Appalachian ridges. One clip, just 15 seconds, was flagged by the software as unusual. Pixelated grayscale footage. 2 barefoot figures, pale, thin, moving in perfect synchronicity through the brush, limbs swinging at the same angle, heads tilted at the same degree. They didn't walk as 2 people. They moved as one. The footage was quietly classified as a wildlife anomaly and buried in archives, but someone leaked it. A forest technician posted a frame-by-frame breakdown to a small encrypted folklore forum. Hours later, the post was gone. The last image showed a single quote in white text on black. It's not that they survived, It's that someone wanted them to. The technician hasn't been seen since. Today, Hollow Ridge is swallowed in green again. The road in is unmarked. From above, satellite images show only canopy. Locals say GPS fails there, phones glitch, dogs go silent. Still, at dusk, some claim to see them, always in pairs, pale, barefoot, watching. Researchers dismiss it as inherited folklore, a psychological echo of rural isolation and grief. But that doesn't explain the drone footage, or the letters, or the bones with no names. The truth is simpler and darker. The Merryweathers never ended. They just stopped being spoken aloud. In silence, they became a movement, a pattern, a legacy fed from within. Same blood, same soul, same end. They're not gone. They're waiting.